Hi, everybody. I'm joined by Dr. Joe Pizzorno and Dr. John Nowicki, and thank you both for joining me today. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Very well. Thank you.
Good, good. Now, it's such an amazing honour to have you both contribute to the text for the two chapters, Chelation and Detoxification. What I thought we'd start with is, how did the two of you connect first? And then we'll talk about both of your journeys and how naturopathy found you.
Okay, I'll start with that one. So, as you know, I founded Baxter University, and although I'm not president there anymore, I still teach. And one of the great things about teaching, not only I get to try to mold the minds of these new doctors, but also I get to see who are the good ones. I mean, that's one way of saying it. Who are the ones who think most like I do, which means strong belief in natural medicine, but also able to go into the research literature and dig out the research that supports what we're doing, or sometimes it doesn't support it, so we want to change what we're doing, but almost always it is stunning how virtually always when I look at the research, it totally supports these age-old naturopathic concepts. Anyway, so when I need some work done, because I like contributing to books like textbooks like yours, sometimes the work gets too much for me. So I like to bring in people who help me do the writing. And so I invited John to do that with me on, I forget what the first book was, the first article was, but I had him, so I try him out, write the chapter, see how it looks. Yeah, that's how I think. So first I was saying, okay, here's my PowerPoint, convert my PowerPoint into a chapter for a book. And I got it right. Okay, now let's start doing more and more projects. So when it came time to do your work, your project, I realized John was a perfect person to do it.
Fantastic, fantastic.
So,
and what about you, John?
Well, I was just going to say that's very kind, and yeah, I think similarly, like Dr. Joe said, I think we think similarly, and our writing style are very compatible. And so a lot of times, when I read things that he's written or he reads things that I've written, we're both like, well, that's exactly how I would have wrote that chapter or that section. And so we kind of just the partnership together in writing has always worked out for both of us. When I was at school, Joe was still the president there at Bastyr a long time ago. But, I worked for him a little bit at school. And then after graduating, going into private practice for 15 years, and then moving on to writing, researching, and editing, connected back with Dr. Joe, and it's worked out great.
Fantastic. How did naturopathy originally find both of you? Like, how were you attracted to this? Because it's such a specialized area.
Well, my story is a little long. I'll just try to do it real quickly. This is in 1970. I'm working in conventional medicine research, University of Washington School of Medicine, Department of Rheumatology. And I was working in the laboratory there as a research assistant and loving it and thinking, I think I'll go off to get a PhD in medical research. And then I graduated from college named Harvard Med College in California. It's one of the leading science colleges in the country. And my roommate from Harvard Med had married a woman, and we were having dinner, kind of the first time we'd had a chance to get together since we graduated. He brought along his wife, and she talked about how she'd been suffering from juvenile rheumatoid arthritis since she was a teenager. And she said, and I just got cured. I said, you just got cured? It's an incurable disease. I know it's incurable because I'm working with MDs and PhDs, not just in Seattle, but we collaborate with labs all over the country trying to find a drug cure for rheumatoid arthritis. And here my friend was cured. I said, well, how'd that happen? She said, well, I went to a naturopathic doctor. My response was, what's that? So I went to this guy and said, so what'd you do for my friend? He said, I detoxified her liver and taught her how to eat properly. I was thinking, wow, that's really different. And there it all started.
Beautiful, beautiful. What about you, John? How did you get there?
So mine was, I was pre-med in college. I went to a small school in the middle of Pennsylvania. Back on the East Coast, naturopathic medicine is still, even to this day, not as recognized as it is on the West Coast. But back then, so I was pre-med, planning on going to conventional medical school. But my advisor was a botanist, so I was taking a lot of classes, doing biology and whatnot. but then also got a job working in the greenhouse, got to know my advisor a little bit more. Because we went to a really small school, we started developing our own classes on medicinal and poisonous plants and medicinal and poisonous mushrooms, and I got really interested in just the kind of plant medicine, plants in general, but plant medicine specifically, including my senior thesis was on the traditional use of medicinal plants by the Iroquois Indians, which were the local tribe around there. But back then, this was, I'm dating myself, but this was the very beginning of the internet. And so, we didn't really have a lot of ways of searching these things. But as I was doing my senior thesis, I came across a school called Bastyr that combined my interest of medicine along with my interest of plants. And I was like, you know what, that sounds like a good fit. So, it had nothing necessarily to do with anything other than an extreme interest. And I went for it, and it's worked out fantastic.
Beautiful, beautiful.
A comment you made about studying the herbal medicines of the Iroquois Indian, one of my surprises early on in Bastyr was we had several students come to see us who were Native Americans. And they came to us to relearn their herbal medicine traditions because they got lost, and we naturopathy kept them alive.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Awesome.
So if we talk specifically about the two chapters that you contributed to, so detoxification and chelation, no small areas by any means, and both very, very fundamental to our philosophy of naturopathy. Why don't we start with detoxification and where you both see it in the modern context now and how it fits with integrative medicine and research-based and things like that?
So a good question. And as you know, I am now lecturing literally all over the world on how environmental metals and chemicals have become the primary drivers of disease. Not that nutritional deficiencies or excesses have gone away as a problem, we simply add an even bigger problem. So I've been looking at not only how they cause damage, but how do you assess the body load and how do you help the body get rid of them, and not only do you help support the natural processes, but then are there natural products or even drugs we can use to speed up the process?
And for you as well, John, are you seeing a phenomenal rise and seeing it change how where the research is going and things?
Yeah, I think and anytime we explore, or at least working with Dr. Joe, exploring some of the role of environmental chemicals, it really kind of, in the very beginning, opened my eyes probably more than I really was aware of. And then digging into it and really looking specifically at how much of an impact these things really do have on our lives. Little things like, even some that almost have become cliche in the sense of, the inside air is worse than the inside air. And you start to think about that and you're like, well, why is that? And then you start to look around your kitchen, you see all these different chemicals that are around, and I think even, and not to get too specific, but even looking at I believe there was a sentence in one of the chapters that we put in there that, there's 60,000 different chemicals in use, and 6.5 billion pounds of chemicals that are released in the air just in the United States every year. That's an incredible number. And so, yeah, it impacts all of us all of the time. I mean, these things are ubiquitous at this point. And so, working on this chapter and giving not only some background behind how some of these are affecting people and how they influence health overall, but then also, there are a lot of natural things that we can do to support the body and actually help, aside from just elimination, and removing some of the avoidance and removing some of these things, but actually help our body to recover.
I mean, you bring us to a really good point. I think it's so fascinating how our tried and true traditional methods of naturopathic practice still work, even with these modern onslaughts. And are you seeing that the research is catching up, or just that we can still rely heavily on our traditional practice?
That's a great question.
Sorry.
That's a really good question. It's mixed. And I think what's difficult, and maybe Dr. Joe will speak a little bit about this too, but I think what's hard is that, when you look at the research, a lot of it is taking one particular toxin independently and examining it. It's almost if we live in a vacuum, and that's just not the case. And so it makes it really difficult when you start to have cumulative effects of thousands of chemicals that we're exposed to on a daily basis to really see, so that's it's maybe it's not a flaw of research, it's just the way research is. But it makes it difficult to examine how does this really impact us on a daily basis when they're really just taking out, for example, glyphosate. We explore that and you look at all this research and it's there and you can look at it and then you're like, okay, but that's one thing. And they're looking at it sort of in a vacuum. Add on top of that, the numerous chemicals, and it makes it very difficult to study. So is it there kind of, do naturopathic, foundational naturopathic principles still apply? Absolutely. And they work.
And
can I answer? So, I've been studying, obviously, ever since day one, I've been paying attention to environmental medicine. But in the last 10 years, I've delved into it much, much more deeply. I've looked at thousands of articles and written all these, the textbook, clinical environmental medicine textbook. And I have now probably 20 hours of lecture in this content. And some things have become clear to me. Number one is, as John was saying, so much of the research is distorted because they've always tried to look at just a single isolated toxin. Well, with very few exceptions, we're not supposed to just one toxin, we're supposed to bunch of them. So it's not only what the individual toxin does, it's also the total toxic load. And it turns out that a lot of these toxins are synergistic with each other. And when you add nutritional deficiencies, they're just dramatically worse. So as I've looked at this, I've come more and more to realize that the body's like this big matrix, and it's doing everything it can to keep things function as well as possible. And as you start poisoning pieces of the matrix, the body has to adapt in other ways, and they're less beneficial. But even further, our ways for detoxifying, while they're effective, they also are somewhat limited. They're limited in terms of the quantity of things we can get rid of, but they're also limited by if there's things that we need are not available, then they won't work. And there's one great example of this, and that is the detoxification of mercury. And most people people who have been studying this know that the primary way to get rid of mercury is by binding to glutathione in the liver and dump it into the gut. Well, the problem is if there's not enough fiber in the gut, we reabsorb 99% of the mercury we just dumped into the gut. So what we've done is with our modern diet and lifestyle being so low in fiber, we've actually sabotaged a fundamental main way we get rid of chemicals and metals. And that intrahepatic recirculation, the intent of that was to keep things from the liver that we want to recycle, bile salts, things like that. But other things will come along too if there's not fiber there to bind to it. So I then look at this issue. It's not just wide range of toxins, total load, synergy, adding to nutritional deficiencies, and we've sabotaged our primary detox mechanism.
I guess that brings me to the chelation chapter in a way, because there's so many people in the naturopathic community that think that chelation is not synergistic to the body, that it's potentially harmful, that it deters too far from our philosophy. How would you both answer that one, given that, we've got these problems, we've got these terrible diets, and the accumulation just of mercury, for example, is off the charts in some patients? How would you answer that one?
You want to go first, John, or you want me?
You're asking some very good questions.
I've got this amazing opportunity, I have to.
Well, no, it's fantastic. It just, it's I love that question. I think it's great. We could probably spend an hour talking about
Easily.
it.
Easily.
I look at it as, well, first of all, a lot of toxic metals in the first place have no viable or purposeful place in the body, right? They don't do anything other than cause harm.
Right.
And so, so to me, we want to get rid of those things. And if the only way to get rid of them is EDTA or, some other method of chelation, then I think that's appropriate. There are natural things that chelate those as well, like N-acetylcysteine, which is, probably of all the chelating agents, maybe one of my favorite. Not only because it chelates some of these toxic metals, but also because it, like Dr. Joe was saying, it's the building block of glutathione. So you get another benefit there. But I would just look at it as, is the purpose of chelation is as far as from a naturopathic standpoint, is to remove, in this case, maybe things that aren't supposed to be there in the first place. So I don't think that's necessarily going against any naturopathic principle in my mind, if that's the safest and most efficacious, is that a word? Did I just make that up? Efficacious?
That's a word.
You know what I'm saying?
It is efficacious.
Way of removing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally agree. What about you, Joe? Because you've...
I'll add to that and listen to the next question. So I'll start by quoting Dr. Bastyr. He was by far the most effective naturopathic doctor I've ever met anywhere in the world. Now, there are a lot of good doctors, but I named the school after Dr. Bastyr because he was just such a special healer physician. And he said, don't let your philosophy blind you to doing what's best for your patient. He said, sometimes a drug is what's best for your patient. Sometimes it's surgery. And you have to recognize what's best for your patient. Do that. And we have a great example of that right here. A lot of these chemicals are new to nature chemicals, man-made chemicals. And they're when we're looking at a lot of the pesticides and non-stick coatings, things like this, they're basically organic molecules to which we've added a halogen, a fluorine or a chlorine or a bromine or things like that. These do not exist in nature with only one exception. I'm curious to see if you can guess what it is. Anyway, they don't exist in nature. So in our bodies, in our liver, the enzyme, it's a dehalogenase enzyme. You have to first dehalogenate these chemicals before you can detoxify them. Well, that enzyme works really poorly in humans. So if you look at something like PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, even though they were banned 40 years ago, these were widely used in industry, and they got into the environment, and they're what are called persistent organic pollutants. That means once they get into the environment, it's almost impossible to break them down because they were designed for that purpose. When they get into our bodies, they're almost impossible to get rid of. So PCBs, the half-life in humans, first of all, it depends on how many chlorines have been added to these things. So the more chlorines in them, the harder they are to detoxify. So the half-life in the body, how long it takes to get rid of half of it, is 2 to 25 years. So you expose yourself to PCB, primary source, by the way, happens to be farm fish these days. Once the PCB goes into your body, if it's halogen enough, it will be in your body for the rest of your life. So you can't get rid of the stuff. So in that situation, yes, we want to support the body's own innate processes, but we don't have good processes for these chemicals. So that's when we have to become more aggressive. And I prefer things which are, safer, like biosequestrants. So things like cholestyramine, cholestyramide, things of this nature, they're originally designed to decrease cholesterol levels. And they do that by binding to cholesterol. Well, the problem is when you use it at high dosages, they give you kind of oily, smelly diarrhea. They didn't work very well. But the action I found out, they actually bound to the toxins that the liver was getting rid of into the gut. So rather than being reabsorbed through intract recirculation, it now binds to these chemicals. So, of course, I use much lower levels, but there's a situation where you got to speed up getting rid of those PCBs, because if you don't, you get more breast cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, thyroid disease, all these things that PCBs cause. You got to get them out of the body.
Yeah, no, definitely. My mind's going in many directions normally with topics like this. But if you think about it like this, I think a question that's always been on my mind is, let's say you meet the patient and they have the heavy metals or the PCBs or whatever the toxins are, and you successfully remove it. Do you think that the genetics have been changed? And do you think that the person, that Darwinian theory, do you think that we're evolving and changing over time and naturopathic medicine is hopefully bringing us back to our true DNA? Or how do you think it's evolving?
Oh, what a wonderful question.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
I have to go there. I've got this opportunity.
There's another chapter in another textbook.
No, it's another textbook, I think.
Wow. Joe?
So I'll start with the response to that. The answer is most definitely yes. We are indeed changing our genetic manifestation. So as you know, we have our genes, which change really slowly over millennia. Then we have epigenetics, where we can turn genes on and off as quickly as we need. Remember, most of our genes aren't being activated. What happens is they get activated when they're needed. A good example of the cyclone P450s, the phase 1 detox. These things use iron and they use heme and they use a lot of energy. So the body only produces it when it needs them. So you get exposed to a toxin, it takes a few days to ramp them up to get rid of it. But what is really scary to me is many of these epigenetic changes are transgenerational. So you take a pregnant rat and you expose her to what are called diabetogens. I mean, researchers are calling these chemicals diabetogens and obesogens because that's what they induce. So you give her diabetogens and she gets pregnant. I mean, and she gets diabetes. Then she bears her children, and her children have diabetes, even though they're not being exposed to the diabetogenic chemical. And her grandchildren have diabetes, high increased risk for diabetes because of the epigenetic changes. Mm-hmm. So the bad news is that we are indeed changing how our genes are manifesting, and many of those changes are not very good. But the good news is that as we become healthier and start developing a healthier lifestyle, we will make ourselves healthier, and our children will be healthier. I often, maybe I did this to you in Australia, but I often will start my lectures by saying, okay, now, how many of you have been told by your family and friends that you're stupid for wasting money on buying organically grown foods? And most people are going to raise their hands, okay? I say, well, let me tell you, not only are you smarter, your children are smarter. Because when those children are evolving in a uterus that's full of neurotoxins, guess what? The brain does not develop as well.
Mm.
Well, and just to add on to that, knowing that a lot of these toxins are increased actually in fetal development because of the way, one in the womb, and exploring the potentials of it affecting, different generations. One possibility is that, when the fetus develops, it has all the eggs that it's going to have as a full-grown woman, if you will, in this case. And so are those eggs being contaminated in utero as the fetus is exposed, which may explain why it's also then, passed on genetically in future generations. It just continues to accumulate. And so those eggs in the fetus are already exposed to some of these toxins, and the genes are already being changed. But like Joe said, I think, there are ways, hopefully as we get healthier and use some of these things that we can, move in a more positive direction. But, it's really about educating first so people understand that these things really are significant and ubiquitous.
Mm. I mean, I certainly see myself in my own practice and in people that I lecture to and things. I do think that what we do makes an enormous change. And I think that, look, I mean, there's a number of your textbooks, Joe, that are just phenomenal, and the access to that information to people, both clinicians and the wider public, is essential at the moment. I think that, including these chapters for me in the textbook has been a real honour and a real privilege, but essential. Like, I couldn't imagine not including these areas because they underpin absolutely every other aspect of health. And sadly or positively, it's, I think, where we're going.
Leah, something I've noticed, I just completed a brand new lecture, which I've, immodestly described as a unified theory of disease, okay? So I'm kind of looking at it, I think I really understand why people are sick. And I'm coming to a conclusion that may surprise people. I think our body is much more able to adapt to a nutrient-deficient environment than is able to adapt to a high-toxin environment. Because I think as we evolved as a species, we developed the resistance to the toxins in our environment, and we knew that nutrient levels would be available, high levels sometimes, low levels other times, and sometimes there are a lot of calories around, other times we have to be able to fast for several days because there wasn't any food available. We adapted to that. We were good at it. But now we've put all these metals and chemicals in the environment that we weren't exposed to before. And they're causing way more damage than people realize. It's harder for us to adapt to them than we can with other situations.
No, definitely. I think it's changing our bodies and it's changing our health prognosis in ways that we can't even envisage into the future. So I think, these chapters in this content is essential reading for anyone, but essential for all of us to be abreast of it. And certainly in different countries around the world with, naturopathic changing being very similar everywhere, but slight variations. I think everyone needs to really upskill themselves in these two key areas. But just to wind up the interview, because I could talk to you both all day, where do you both see naturopathy heading?
Well, I'll tell you where I'd like to see it head.
Please. Even better.
Actually, I do a fair amount of political work in trying to advance curative medicine. I think we have to look at what does an ideal healthcare system look like. And I think an ideal healthcare system is a stool with 3 feet, or three legs. Leg number 1 is public health. If you look at the increase in human longevity and decrease in disease load, public health has been the biggest factor over all the other professions, okay? So we have to realize public health is really important. But public health more than just contagion control, public health from the perspective of doing things like teaching farmers how to grow food with more nutrients in it and less toxins in it. So public health in a much bigger perspective. Second part is primary care. As far as I'm concerned, all primary care should be done by naturopathic doctors. And I think that optimal primary care is an amalgamation of today's naturopathic doctor and a primary family practice MD. And the third area is then, might say, special medicine, where the body's damage has progressed so far, you need a high-level intervention. That's where the MDs prefer to function. That's where they should function. So that's the ideal world. In naturopathic medicine, we are the primary care doctors.
I like that. What about you, John? Either in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, and I've believed this from the beginning, that naturopaths and naturopathic medicine are great at prevention, are great at working with chronic disease, are great at, like Joe said, primary care providers, we first line intervention, if you will. And there's absolutely a place for conventional medicine in all of that, and certainly in often cases in acute care. Just going a little bit with the public health, I think what a lot, and this is a gigantic generalization, of just educating people to realize the significance of, if we're looking in this case specifically, if we're talking about chemicals and the significance of the food that they eat, the way that they treat their body, the things that they do, and switching that up, because I don't think that's going to change unless the public actually are educated enough to understand that, hey, this is important. We need this to change, even going all the way back to the farmers. And so I think that's a key component. Where would I would love to see naturopathic doctors and naturopathic medicine be the absolute primary care source of medicine for people. And then to expand and need, when we need specialists, when we need other things, that those people are available. But that's kind of where I see it. And maybe it's a little bit skewed in Washington, perhaps, in the state where I practice, because I have the ability to not just use naturopathic, but also some conventional medicine. So, it's kind of almost, if you will, a one-stop shop for people sometimes. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, so edit that out. No, I think that, like Dr. Joe said, I think that naturopathic doctors serve best, I think, as first-line primary care providers. I think that's where we shine, and especially for chronic disease and whatnot. So that's where I think I would love to see that happen across the world. Not just in this country, but across the world.
Me too. And I think how wonderful to have these two areas, these two key foundational areas of naturopathic medicine, to give the clinicians the foundational support in their practice. And I think it helps to give them an ability to build really positive relationships with their patients to help them move forward. So thank you both for contributing, and it's a real privilege to include the two chapters. Thank you.
And thanks for your great work creating this textbook. It's an excellent textbook.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, and honored to be included. So thank you.
Thank you.